Welcome to our YouTube broadcast of our Wednesday Bible study. Grateful for any and all who are watching, especially live, but also if you're joining this at another time during the week, we're glad that you're doing that as well. We're in the middle of our study on the parables of Jesus and are looking today at Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. For those who may be watching, if you haven't received the notes yet via email, that's because they haven't been sent out yet. Vanna was not here today, and so we couldn't get those out to you, but I've got them to her, and she'll get them out to you when she gets back in the office, I think probably tomorrow. So if you don't have those notes, they'll be coming your way here soon. The parable that we're looking at today is one of the most famous, one of the most beloved, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Everybody knows it, everybody's heard it, everybody's read it, and yet, as with all things with which we become familiar, there's need to go back over it again because we end up forgetting things, or when we come back at it again in a new way, we see things we haven't seen before. Certainly the case for me as I was preparing for this study today. The story is really straightforward. It is pretty simply presented, and the lesson is really pretty straightforward and simple as well. How do you love your neighbor? And who is your neighbor? And Jesus answers that question. Surely, your neighbor is anybody and everybody. And how you love them, one of the ways you love them is by caring for them in a time of great need. So there's no debate about any of that, and yet the story has some interesting details to it that provoke our conversation, our thinking, our reflection in various directions. So let's read over the parable together, looking at it on our notes. Those who are here have notes, and they can look at it there, but it's Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. Luke 10, 25 through 37. An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to vindicate himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and took off, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came upon him, and when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, treating them with oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." As I said, there's nothing really surprising in the story. You've read it, you know it, and yet there are several things to take note of as we reflect on it together today. The first thing to take note of, we often think of the parable itself, the parable proper, the story itself, but the setting is important to get as well. The setting is a scribe who is trying to trip up Jesus. The text actually says an expert in the law. We were defining a scribe on Sunday night past, and that's a good description of a scribe, an expert in the law. You'll sometimes see it rendered lawyer as well. That's not the same kind of lawyer as we have today. A scribe is somebody who knows the law of Moses, who has studied it, who knows it inside and out, upside and down. He is an expert in the law. Ezra, from the book of Ezra, if you read chapter 7, you'll find there Ezra described as God raises him up and sends him to the people of Judah after they've come there from the exile. Ezra is an expert in the law. He has studied the law. He is devoted to living the law and to teaching the law and bringing Israel back to faithfulness to the law. And so Ezra is an expert in the law. So this guy is an expert in the law. He knows it backwards and forwards. He's trying to trick Jesus. This is not a sincere question. And as I say in the comments there, Jesus knows this is not a sincere question. He asks a very basic question, really. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Well, Jesus says, what do you read in the law? I mean, he's basically saying, well, you know what it is. You've been studying the law. What does the law tell you? What are you supposed to do? So Jesus knows he's trying to trick him. He understands what's going on. And of course, these guys were coming Jesus' way all the time. The scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the priests, they were trying to trip up Jesus. They were trying to catch Jesus in a gotcha kind of moment. You know how politics plays out today. You know, when we have debates, that's what debates are all about, trying to set up your opponent to fall into a gotcha kind of trap. You know, make a mistake in what you say and then, boom, pounce on it. That's what they're trying to do with Jesus here. They're trying to undermine Jesus' popularity with the crowds. They're trying to show him to be a charlatan of one sort and another. So Jesus was always on the lookout for these guys, but he turns the tables on this guy. The guy's trying to catch Jesus in a mistake. Well, it's Jesus who will catch this scribe in a mistake. His mistake is that he doesn't understand who the neighbor really is and what love of neighbor really requires. And he's actually going to expose this man's loss, his deficit, and show him how to get things right. The lawyer, by the way, the scribe, falls right into the trap. When Jesus says, what does the law say? You can hear in here the scribe's pride kind of welling up in him, you know. He said to him, what is written in the law? What do you read there? And he answered. And he gives this great answer. It's a perfect answer. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And, you know, you can just kind of feel the pride rising up in him, you know. I do know my law, and I can tell you exactly what it is, even though he doesn't see how Jesus has kind of flipped the tables on him. And Jesus says, well, you've answered well. And so the scribe decides he's really going to show off with Jesus. And who is my neighbor? The common definition of neighbor in Jewish circles, of course, is a fellow Jew. And so that's what the guy's expecting Jesus to say. And as soon as Jesus says that, however he would say it, then this guy's going to really feel filled with pride, because he'll say, well, I've been doing that. And he'll give, he'll cite chapter and verse of how he's been, loving his neighbor so well. So you can feel the pride in the scribe. Again, they were experts in the law, and they knew they were. There was justification to it. And yet, Jesus shows them that even though he's an expert in the law, he's not necessarily an expert in the way to live the faith. There's a big difference. You can know the Bible frontward and backward and not be faithful in living the way of Jesus Christ. Well, Jesus tells the story, who is my neighbor? He's trying to vindicate himself. That is, he's wanting to show Jesus that he has fulfilled it, so that Jesus can say, well, you will enter eternal life. So Jesus tells a story. The story has some interesting elements that aren't obvious to us at first reading. You have to know a little bit of the background of things to appreciate it. To the crowd in Jesus' day, they would have understood these things. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho was about a 20-mile road. Jerusalem sat 2,300 feet above sea level, and Jericho, which was close to the Dead Sea, sat 1,300 feet below sea level. And it's about a 20-mile ride. So it's a steep, and it was a twisty, windy road. And so it became a road that was a favorite for robbers. It was a great place to find somebody, to trap somebody, and to take advantage of them. So the setting, the story, the idea that this man is going down this road from Jerusalem to Jericho, and this happens to him, it's not surprising. It was happening to people all the time. Matter of fact, William Barclay, whose commentary I pulled in at various stages along our study, he shares that it was still dangerous in the 1930s. He must have been writing about in the 1950s or whatever. But it was still dangerous in the 1930s. And it was reputed that you never walked that road at night. You never drove that road. It was a drivable road now. You never drive that road at night because robbers, during the night would build up obstacles in the middle of the road and make you stop. And once you stop, they would come out and rob you. So it's always been a dangerous road. You needed to be very, very careful in walking it. So that this man, what happens to this man on this road, no big surprise. It's kind of like today, all the things we hear about how dangerous things have gotten in inner city life. It won't surprise us if we hear of a loved one who goes into downtown Atlanta and ends up getting, carjacked or knocked down and pocketbook stolen or that kind of thing. That doesn't surprise us. It makes us angry, but it doesn't surprise us. We know that the streets are dangerous in the cities. Well, it's the same thing here. This road is a dangerous road, and this man's situation is not a surprising circumstance. So the man is beaten, stripped of his clothes, robbed, and left half dead. So along comes a priest. Now, Jericho, Barclay talks about how Jericho was kind of, when the priests, by the way, the priests didn't stay in the temple all the time. They would come and do their service in the temple and then would leave, and another cohort would come up. And so all the priests, how many ever number there were, they were divided up in sections. And when their section was on duty, they would go up to Jerusalem and serve in the temple. And a good number of priests lived down in Jericho because of the proximity and that type of thing. And so, again, a priest going up the road towards Jerusalem or coming down from Jerusalem towards Jericho, that would not be a surprising kind of thing. But this is the priest going up towards Jerusalem. He's getting ready to serve in the temple. It's his time. His chance has come. You only got maybe 2 chances in a year to serve in the temple. And if you remember the story at the beginning of Luke about Zechariah, John the Baptist's father, not only is his section serving at that time, but by lot he is able to go in the place right up to the Holy of Holies to do service in the temple. And that's where he meets Gabriel, or Gabriel meets him, I should say. But it was by lot that he was able to go in there. So, it's a high honor. It's a precious honor to be able to go up and serve in the temple for the priest. And it's not one, if you miss it today, you're not going to get to do it next week. It'll be another 6 months or so before you might have a chance to go back and take care of that opportunity. You know all these facts. You know that the priest, of course, had to be careful when they were going up for duty. They had to maintain cleanliness, ritual cleanliness. In order to go and serve in the temple, they had to be ritually clean. And so they had to adhered to a set of rules and regulations, would have to go through various washings and wear the right clothing and all that kind of stuff. Well, if you're a priest and you're heading to Jerusalem and you see a man over on the side of the road who looks dead, your first thought is, I can't touch him. If I touch him, then I'm ritually unclean and I won't be able to serve in the temple. It's just straightforward, logical stuff. The priest obviously is afraid that he would become impure by dealing with man. It could be even if he's not dead, there could be other factors related to it. He could be another sinner of another sort. He could be a dreaded Samaritan, as we're going to talk about. He's afraid. It's obvious, though it's not spelled out in the text, but it's obvious that he's concerned about contamination, religious contamination, ritual contamination. And this would preclude his being able to go to the temple and serve. So he passes on by on the other side. The Levite comes behind him, does the same thing. The Levite was not at the same level of service in the temple as the priest, but still did provide service in the temple. And it's assumed that he has the same fear that the priest had. Now, William Barclay offers another possibility, though there's nothing in the text that would make you think this, so this is pure speculation. He talks about how it was known, and this doesn't surprise us in the least, because we know it takes place in our day, or has in our days, that a robber could pretend to be hurt. He could be playing possum, as the old term goes. And when the person came over to tend to him, all of a sudden he would spring on them, knock them down, beat them, rob them, take off. Barclay offers that as maybe a possibility, as another possibility. The fact that there is a priest and then a Levite, and he's playing off the notion that maybe Jesus had another type of issue in mind for mentioning the two rather than it being the same one. The text doesn't tell us that it's anything necessarily different. The text doesn't go into all of this. We have to read it into it from what we know of the priest's work and the Levite's work. But Barclay offers that possibility as another reason why he might have been afraid to deal with him. Certainly any other passerby could have had the same kind of fear. At any rate, again, that's just a complete speculation. There's nothing in the text itself that would lend itself to that. So those two pass by, and up comes the Samaritan. You know why the Samaritans were considered bad guys. We've talked about it on several occasions. Just briefly, it goes back in history. The northern kingdom, Israel, whose capital was Samaria, back in the 800s, 700s, the Assyrians descended upon the northern kingdom, defeated it, captured the people, the leading citizens, and took them off and relocated them in various places in the Assyrian kingdom. At the same time, they brought other pagan peoples and brought them down to the northern kingdom territory and resettled them there. The idea was that you want to destroy this people. You don't want them to be Jews anymore. You want them to be a mix of people so that they can't rise up. If they remain Jewish there, then there's always a possibility they're going to get filled with national fervor and rise up and throw off their enemy. So you try to disperse the people and you try to reseed it with other types of people to take away the connection between land and people and religion. And so that had happened. Pagan peoples, non-Jewish peoples had been relocated in the land. They, of course, would bring with them no religion or their own religious traditions, and they intermarried with the Jews who were left there. And over the course of time, of course, those were mixed marriages in the literal sense of the term. They were no longer producing truly, purely Jewish persons, but rather various mixed breeds of persons, different types of ethnicities coming together. At the same time, they were bringing in their religious traditions, and so whatever the Jewish tradition the Samaritans held on to, they were intermingling with some of these other ideas. And to be certain, the Samaritans had different understandings of the Jewish faith in so many ways. And so the religion was not pure, the people are not pure. And if you, as we've been talking about on Sunday nights, especially in Jesus' time, the emphasis on purity is really high. You've had all this Greek culture washing over Palestine, and you've had the Jews fighting tooth and nail to ward it off. You have the Maccabees who are doing their stuff, and so you've got that real purity instinct going on. It's really hit a fever pitch among the people. And so the Samaritans, because they are half-breeds and because their religion isn't pure, you don't want anything to do with them. And so they hated the Samaritans. Of course, the Samaritans hated them back. They had reason to hate them back. And so it was just not a good thing. They were enemies, even though they shared common religious values and whatnot. But the truly Orthodox Jew would have nothing to do with a Samaritan. And so, again, if you're a good Jew, your neighbor is your fellow Jew. You've got to maintain the lines. We can't allow foreigners in. We're fighting this Greek influx, and we can't let down our walls. And so, it's really a critical mass kind of high point thing here, this hatred of the Samaritans. Now is the time to hate your neighbor. It's kind of the motto they could have been throwing around in those days, because if you didn't, then the Greek way, which was in your neighbor, would have washed over you and would have taken over. And they already knew, because of what happened, with Antiochus Epiphanes, and the religion being outlawed. They already knew what could happen. The temple being desecrated, they knew what could happen. So you don't have anything to do with those dirty Samaritans. Even though we don't agree with that mindset, you can appreciate it. And it's a real deal. And we deal with it today, right? Madeline's in high school, and everybody's got an idea about who they are and what gender they are and all that kind of stuff. And we have to keep telling her, we don't hate anybody, we don't act mean towards anybody, but we don't want you can't do a lot of stuff with that person because they see things differently than we do. And how do you maintain separation and yet be loving at the same time? It's going on. It's always going on. It just is. So the Samaritan comes on the scene. He doesn't have any qualms. He sees a man who is hurt, and he gets to work taking care of him. That's a powerful image right there. He doesn't ask who he is. He doesn't look to see what color he is. Doesn't look to see, if he's wearing, the religious garb of some religion that you're supposed to hate. He just starts tending to this person. He looks with compassion on this person. That's a very powerful image. That's supposed to be our first response. Look with compassion on this person who is hurt, and he is obviously hurt. It's implied, it's assumed in the story that the man who is hurt is Jewish, although Jesus never identifies him, and it doesn't really matter. The Samaritan, who is an outcast, takes care of the man who's on the ground, and most likely it is a Jewish man. He gets busy taking care of him right then and there. He takes him to an inn, checks him into a room, takes care of him overnight. The next day he gets up. He leaves money with the innkeeper. He says, please make sure that he gets the care he needs. If you end up spending more money than I've left you, and he left him 2 days' wages. The denarii was 1 day's wage. He left him 2 days' pay. If when I come back through, and I will, if you've had to spend more than this, I'll make it up to you. So he cares for him in the immediate situation, and he provides for his care beyond that. It's an extravagant display of care. And Jesus is drawing the picture in extravagant tones. You've got two very religious people, and they pass by, and you have an outcast, the worst kind of outcast imaginable, and he stops and shows compassion. And he doesn't just do a little bit. He does everything. He puts himself, at risk in so many ways. He alters his travel plans, and he spends money taking care of this guy. So at the end of all this, Jesus says to the scribe, okay, who do you think was the true neighbor to this man? Well, there are no choices here. You can't make a case for the first two guys. There's no way to make a case. It's obvious who's been the neighbor. That's part of the plan here. It's obvious. There's no way you can't say this man who showed mercy to this one who was hurt, he is the true neighbor. At which point Jesus says, okay, you go do likewise. You see how he's exposed this man's, how he's brought him along and exposed his true compassion, his lack of true understanding. What is a neighbor? I'll tell you what a neighbor is. A neighbor is somebody who doesn't look to see what nationality, what race, any of that kind of stuff. He just goes and helps this person who's lying on the ground right now. That's what a true neighbor is. Powerful, powerful lesson. So, obvious things there that hit you, and you don't need me to tell you how to make them apply to you, but there are still points of reflection to take from it that I ask you to join me in making. The first point of reflection there on that next to last page, how are we like the scribe who tests Jesus? And what I'm talking about is back at the first. He is a scribe. He is an expert in the law. He's been doing this for a long time. He knows the faith inside out. He knows it all, doesn't he? That's what he's assuming. How often do we assume that? We've all been in church. Probably all of us here have been in church since we were little children. And we have been in Sunday school and in church. And in the good old days, we went to church on Sunday nights, and then we came on Wednesdays. We have grown up in the church. We know the faith. We know the Bible. But do we? Jesus shows that the scribe wasn't as informed, wasn't as spiritually informed, wasn't as spiritually formed as he should have been. We can rest on our laurels. For our having been in church for so long, we can think we've arrived. The scribe hadn't arrived. Maybe it is. We're in the same boat he was in that day. Shouldn't we be in the habit of asking God to show us where our understanding and practice of faith is incomplete? We assume that it's incomplete. Oh Lord, show us how to make it whole. How are we like the priest and the Levite? One of the things in our typical reading of it is we make the Levite and the priest out to be really bad guys. They're just too hyped up on worship. They've got it all mixed up. And I think we make them bad guys too quickly. God takes worship seriously. Read the Old Testament. Read the prescriptions. Read how the temple, he gave instructions on how the temple is to be built. He gave, talking all the way down to what kind of materials, linens and whatnot could be used to decorate it, to adorn it. He gave the priest all these rituals, all these regulations. Worship is important. Those who carry out worship need to be prepared to lead in worship. So the priest and the Levite had great responsibility. And before we jump on the bandwagon against them, let us appreciate, that they were being attentive to what they were called to do. That's an impulse in them. That is a good impulse. All of this, for me, means we shouldn't diminish the act of worship and being a leader in worship or participating in worship, which is what we're prone to do here, but rather it elevates the call to mercy. You know how valuable, you know how highly God holds worship, and yet he holds acting in compassion to somebody who is hurt higher than that. It accentuates the act of mercy. Think about Jesus in his own interaction with the Pharisees when he really lets them have it, Matthew 24, 25, 26, 23, somewhere in there, where he really lets them have a whole chapter where he's just letting them have it. And he gets after it and he says, you guys tithe mint and dill and cumin, you just tithe every little thing, and yet you've neglected mercy and justice. You should have done the one with... You've got to be merciful. He's extolling the love of neighbor. Right next to love of God Almighty is love of neighbor. As seriously as you take loving God, you are to take loving your neighbor. That's what this parable shows us. How are we like the Samaritan? As we just said, the Samaritan went to great lengths to care for this man. He put his travel plans on hold. He spent money that probably maybe he didn't have. It's convenient. Most of the time it's when it fits in our schedule. Most of the time it's when we've got enough money or whatever to do it. The example of the Samaritan challenges us to be ready to care for that one who is in need when it's not convenient for us. Are we like the Samaritan? Anyway, things that came to mind for me about this parable that challenge us to see it whole. We all know it, and we know it well, but it challenges us even more than we typically think it does. Any questions, comments, things that I missed that you all picked up? I'm sure there are. All right. Thank you guys for being here today. Thank you, anybody who's watching right now or who will be watching